So, wanted to propose an idea. A lot of you have cell phones, so I wanted to ask the question, given the choice, how many of you would rather have this phone, or you could say even a different, newer, nicer phone, one that has faster speed, more internet capabilities, more just like software on it, whether it's like iPhone 11 or some future phone. Just raise the hands, who would rather have a newer, nicer phone? Okay. Just about everyone in here. A lot of you are going to be driving in a year. You're going to be sophomores, and you will be having a vehicle, maybe it'll be a family vehicle, but how many of you would rather have just like your own personal car? It could be a car like this or some other just like new, nice car, whether it's a Corvette or a Ferrari or any other similar type of car. Just raise your hands. Okay, basically everyone in here. That begs the question, why? Why would you want those things? Any thoughts? Why would you want those things? You think?
Because they're better than what we had later or now.
Okay, better than what you have now. You think? Yeah, Jack.
I would kind of see these as kind of like necessities for nowadays because everybody's using phones in school for work or personal things, and you need a car to get around for like nowadays. So I'd say phones and cars are more of like a necessity nowadays.
Okay. More of a necessity. What about having like a really nice phone and a really nice phone? Like, why would we want those? I think it could potentially help you socially, help you with friends. If you have a really nice car, I think that maybe it would help you with dating. Yeah.
Would you like to stand out? It'll help you like stand out among your crowd.
Okay. Help you stand out? Yeah, definitely. And adults are thinking pretty much the same way. I mean, for them it might be like a house, like they want a really nice house. They want to impress their friends, they want to impress their families, and so they're wanting a really nice house and car. They're wanting to look successful. Now take that thought and set it aside while I show you a few statistics on climate change. So according to NASA, 97% of climatologists, so that means someone with a PhD that is publishing articles in climatology, 97% of them, according to NASA, are claiming that climate change is real and that humans are the main cause of it, that it's man-made. While at the same time, only 50% of the American public believes that. So we have to ask the question, why is there this huge discrepancy? Why do so many scientists believe in climate change and so many, just like the general public, does not? Yeah, Maxim.
Because a lot of the general public really just listens to, like, they're going to get their info, they're going to get their information from like one specific resource maybe that's like completely biased to one side, and they don't really look at all the different views of like the scientists who are actually doing the research, or just listen to what someone else thinks.
Okay, good idea. Yeah, Jack.
Another one could be the people would think they are good, they are doing the right thing, but being told, no, this is bad, you're the cause of the problem, they take offense of it and say, no, that's not me, and therefore ignore it and disbelieve it.
Okay, they might not want to believe it because it could imply that they contributed to it. Is that
Yeah.
the idea that you're proposing? Okay. And then I have to ask the question, like, NASA is, we view them as a valid source? Do we view them as someone that's going to be accurate? Raise your hand if you think NASA is a valid source. Okay. Why do we think NASA is a valid source? Reagan, why do you think NASA is a valid source?
Because they're like really trusted and they've done a lot of things, like going to the moon and stuff.
Okay, yeah, they put people on the moon. They put satellites in space. Yeah, cool.
Because they're like the largest company that deals mostly with like that atmospheric pressure and like everything like that.
Okay. Yeah, Nathan.
They're able to see more than we are.
Okay, able to see more than we are. Yeah, you can say that's true. So you have just this huge discrepancy between what scientists believe and what the average American believes. I want to go more into that now. Going back a little bit to the idea of like the car and the nice phone or a nice house. I want you to imagine, you all probably aren't really doing like lemonade stands anymore, but you probably were when you were younger. Imagine that you're younger, maybe 4 years or so, and you're doing a big lemonade stand. And it's the most popular lemonade stand on your block and even like 5 blocks over. You have kids just lined up down the street for it. You're making hundreds of dollars every single week with this lemonade stand. And then along comes this kid, and he happens to be like the most athletic, healthy kid in your entire grade. And he starts telling people, hey, this lemonade isn't very healthy, it has a lot of sugar in it, you shouldn't drink it. And then people stop going to your lemonade stand. How are you going to feel about that kid? Say, someone say hate? Huh? Hatred? Be angry? Think that you'll want to silence that kid, shut him up? Okay? So then imagine that what you do is you find like the next most athletic kid that people view as pretty reputable, pretty credible, and you start paying him $20 a week to just go and promote your lemonade and say like, hey, this lemonade is fine, it's healthy, like I'm drinking it, it's all right. Start paying him to do that, and then all the kids start coming back, and then you're making hundreds of dollars a week again, and the amount you're paying him is little compared to how much you're actually making. I bring that analogy up just to highlight that that is basically what some of these oil companies are doing. They will pay people to say that climate change isn't happening, and then going back to like the nice house and the nice car, like a lot of those people are making a lot of money just by saying it. So it's like that idea of self-interest. Wanted to show you an example of this. Not all of these people, like, I mean, there's that 3% that don't say climate change is real. Sometimes they pay actual scientists, but more oftentimes than not, they're paying people that don't even have a background in science, but are just good at arguing. So for example, they'll pay lawyers, and they'll pay people that have like backgrounds in political science and other things that really aren't related to the atmosphere and to the climate. They'll pay people that really haven't studied it, but they'll pay people that are just really good at arguing and really good at convincing people. Someone who's good at acting confident and acting like they know what they're talking about is they nail certain talking points. I'll show you an example with this one book specifically. So I personally, I'll tell you, I didn't believe in climate change for a pretty long time. In high school, I didn't believe in climate change. I had a family member who didn't believe it, and I would spend time with this family member and the family member's friend as they would say that climate change was a big hoax. And I naturally believed that, and I started going to college. Me and my brother, we were both taking classes in geography, and started noticing that the professors, they were teaching about climate change. Like, why are they teaching about that if it's a hoax? It made me wonder, like, is there something they maybe understand that I don't? Like, they have PhDs, they've been studying this stuff for a really long time. So I went back to my family member and told them that, like, hey, they're teaching it in college. Like, oh yeah, of course they'll do that. Like, they try and push those ideas in college. Like, well, what reasons do you have for not believing it? And he gave my brother and I a copy of this book. I'll go ahead and show the book right here. It's called The Politically Incorrect Guide to Global Warming Alarmism. This book right here, you can see there's like a penguin wearing like a Hawaiian lei. It says, might be hard to read, it says a definitive resource to debunk global warming alarmism. The Politically Incorrect Guide to Global Warming and Environmentalism. And it's by Christopher C. Horner. So we started reading through this book and we're like, well, wait, who is Christopher C. Horner? Why would he be a valid source? This is a book that's sold like probably millions of copies, by the way. Then we look up. I'll show you right here. Look up Christopher C. Horner. So it's this guy right here who works for what's called the Competitive Enterprise Institute. Okay, what's the Competitive Enterprise Institute? We start doing research. Oh, it turns out he's a lawyer, so he's an attorney in Washington, D.C. Indicates that he doesn't really have a background in science. And then we keep reading. We find out that the Competitive Enterprise Institute receives money from Exxon Mobile. Okay, we know who Exxon Mobile is. Who are they?
They're like a fueling company, like an oil company. It's like they go and like refine oils and gasoline
so they are an oil company. And we started noticing this pattern that we could look at almost anyone who was really well educated, who was saying that climate change wasn't happening, and they were receiving some type of funding or some type of compensation through a big oil company, whether it's the Koch brothers or Exxon Mobile or some other type of company. There was that pattern. So if any of you ever say, well, climate change isn't real, look at this article, I'll sit down with you and we'll find out who the author is that wrote it, who he works for, and where they get their funding. And it's the same kind of thing that tobacco companies were doing in the 1950s as doctors and scientists started coming out and saying, hey, tobacco is really harmful for people, it's causing cancer. They were paying people to say that it wasn't, to testify that tobacco was really not harmful. That's what companies do if it will save them money, if it will help them to keep having customers. And so, you have Christopher C. Horner, you have others that write articles and write books. Competitive Enterprise Institute, so that's a think tank. There's other think tanks that do the same thing. I've read a book called Dark Money, and it talks a lot about the Koch brothers. They fund a lot of think tanks. They own a think tank called the Cato Institute. Cato Institute is always denying climate change. They contribute a lot of money to other think tanks. What they also do is they will fund universities. So there's a school in Washington, D.C. called George Mason University that they've given, I want to say, $10 to $20 million to the last decade. Koch brothers just gave a ton of money to Utah State even. They gave money to the University of Utah. They give money to schools all around the nation to try and get them to promote certain ideologies and to promote the idea that climate change isn't really happening. And that's, remember when I said they inherited $1 billion, continued to grow it, and they had a combined net worth of around 70 to 80 billion. They had the kind of money that they'd thrown a couple million at a university or a think tank, doing that kind of stuff didn't even faze them. So when we say they pay scientists or lawyers to basically convince the public that it's not happening, that's one component. Another big component is the fact that they will fund political campaigns. If someone wants to run for the U.S. Senate or for the U.S. House of Representatives, it literally takes $1 million to $10 million in advertising to be competitive, or raising that amount of money so that you can run commercials and radio ads and have billboards. It takes a ton of money. And so what these brothers would do, the Koch brothers, which is other oil companies, they fund political campaigns so they'll help people get elected to the Senate and then House of Representatives. And then if someone says, hey, let's pass this bill that will make it so that we give more money for solar. We use some of our tax dollars to make it so that people can afford solar. It's called a subsidy. There's already a lot of subsidies that exist right now for oil. They'll say, let's do a subsidy for solar. Then one of those politicians will block it, and they'll do everything they can to prevent it from being passed. So when you have literally hundreds of people in Congress that are receiving money from oil companies, it's going to prevent legislation being passed that would lead to improving the air quality and improving our situation with climate change. Wanted to show this quote. Upton Sinclair, he was an author. He wrote a book in the early 1900s that led to more regulation of food industries, making sure that our food was clean and not getting people sick. I think the Food and Drug Administration started in large part because of some of his writings. Ran for governor in California at one point. But wanted to show this quote. Is there anyone that would be willing to read this for us? Jack, will you go ahead and read it?
Mm-hmm. It is difficult to get a man to understand something when their salary depends on them not understanding it.
Okay. What does that mean? It's difficult to get, and you could say man or a woman, it's difficult to get someone to understand something if their salary depends on them not understanding it. Any thoughts on this? Yeah, Nathan.
It's difficult to get someone to change their mind if they're getting paid to think the opposite.
Exactly. It's hard to get, you could reword it, it's hard to get someone to believe in climate change if they're being paid or if their salary is dependent on them convincing others climate change isn't real. It's hard to get someone to be objective like that. This is kind of an in-depth thing I'm going to go into with psychology. You don't really need to take notes on it, just listen. So there's an idea in psychology called cognitive dissonance. Basically it means that if someone's actions and their beliefs don't like align, like if they're doing something they don't believe in, it will create kind of this mental tension inside of them, and they will either change their actions or they'll change their beliefs. And so if they're getting money and that's what they need to do, if they keep working at that job long enough, there's a good chance that eventually, to like get rid of that cognitive dissonance or that mental tension, they will start to like believe what they are doing in their job, and they will like literally come to believe that climate change isn't real, even if it means they're ignoring a lot of evidence, even if it means they're ignoring the majority of scientists. So then the large effect that this is going to have on society is a lot of people saying like, climate change isn't real, climate change isn't happening. That family member I mentioned still doesn't believe in climate change. His friends still don't believe in climate change. They haven't been exposed to some of the like information that my brother and I have, or that a lot of like really educated people have. And keep in mind, like, it's only in the US where we have still like a pretty good chunk of the population that doesn't believe in this. Other countries, they don't have their own versions of the Koch brothers. They don't have these huge oil companies that are convincing their population that climate change isn't happening. And so most of the people there, like throughout these countries in Europe and like other parts of the world, they trust their scientists and they say, yeah, like, climate change is real, it's a problem. Where here, we have a lot of people that are basically being convinced otherwise by oil companies. I wanted to show you a video. You all know Bill Nye the Science Guy?
Yeah.
So there's this video of Bill Nye the Science Guy basically debating a guy on TV named Mark Moreno. Mark Moreno, he's in the book Dark Money as well. He is what they call a professional pit bull. It's like his job to go after scientists, to try and convince people that climate change isn't real. Doesn't actually have a background in science. He studied political science at George Mason University. That's that Koch brothers school that I mentioned. Do you know what someone studies in a political science degree? Yeah.
Isn't it like just like politics and stuff?
Exactly. It's
Actually, science.
yeah, it's not actual science. They're not learning about the atmosphere. They're learning about political systems. They're learning about like maybe political theory, learning about like U.S. politics, campaigns and elections, like those types of things. I have 20 credit hours in political science myself. I almost have a minor in it. Like I took a lot of classes in it, did a lot of internships for my degree, but I also did like history education, geography, other stuff. Like I probably took a lot of comparable classes to Mark Moreno, but he's on here, or he goes around just like debating people on climate change, getting a lot of money from oil companies, and he acts really confident, he talks fast, and the oil companies like what he does, and so they continue to invest in him. I wanted to show you this video though.
And what are the biggest factors, the man-made factors creating the acceleration of CO2 in the atmosphere?
The biggest thing is, when I was 9 years old, the Earth's population changed from 2.999 billion to 3 billion. Now it's, in my lifetime, it's now 7 billion people trying to live the way we lived in the developed, way we live in the developed world. And it's just, we're just burning carbon and spewing carbon dioxide in the atmosphere at an extraordinary rate.
Right, so Mark Morano, if there is a massively increased acceleration in CO2 in the atmosphere, at the same time that there's been a bigger than double the sizing of the population of the planet, why would that not be inexorably linked? Explain to me.
Well, CO2 is rising. No one's disputing that. What Bill Nye just did was waste everyone's time explaining that CO2 is rising. The question is, what impact does CO2 have on the weather? What impact does CO2 have on climate change? And that is where you look at the geologic record. We've had warmer periods where it's been with lower CO2, and we've had colder periods with higher CO2. And you have to go way back for some of that. But the bottom line is hundreds of factors are dictating our climate. The medieval warm period was both southern and northern hemisphere. On my website, there's literally, it demolishes the idea of a hockey stick, new peer-reviewed studies. So the idea that Bill Nye is just going around saying CO2 is up, therefore global warming is dangerous, we should be concerned, it's not. It's not dangerous. The bottom line is all these other factors dwarf the impact of CO2.
Let me jump in. How do you explain that the eastern seaboard, for example, is getting some of the warmest weather it's ever had, at the same time that California has been plunged into storm after storm in the last week, and you see that New York last month had the worst hurricane it's ever endured, and so on and so on.
Sure,
How do you explain that we're getting so many of these freakish weather patterns if at the same time you've got all this extra CO2 in the atmosphere and all these people now guzzling up power and energy and emitting gases that weren't there before?
No.
Surely that is evidence, isn't it?
No, you go to the peer-reviewed literature. You're looking at anecdotal evidence. This is now the level of your daily horoscope. Basically global warmers like Bill Nye say, global warming will cause many bad weather events. And guess what? Bad weather events happen all the time. So people look and they say, look, there's more proof. There's a bad weather event. Bottom line, big tornadoes, F3 and larger since the 1950s have dropped dramatically. Bottom line, we've gone the longest period without a major U.S. Category 3 or larger hurricane hitting the U.S. since at least 1900, maybe the Civil War. Bottom line, new study in the journal Nature, peer-reviewed, no change in U.S. drought in the last 60 years. Bottom line, a new study out shows that drought has not changed in 85 to
Okay, let me give you
years.
wait a minute. Let me add one more. Let me add one more bottom line before I defer to Bill Nye. He knows more about this than I do. But another bottom line: the world is indisputably getting warmer. The UN Weather Agency said last week, 2012 is on track to become one of the top 10 hottest years on record. And all the weird climatic changes we're seeing. Bill, over to you.
This will be the hottest 2 decades in history, in recorded history. And so when you throw around a statement like the UN says it's not the hottest 20 years, I gotta disagree with you. And maybe some surface data show that in certain cities. Wasn't.
Any thoughts on that? Yeah, Nathan.
The one guy says bottom line a lot.
Mark Morano? Okay. Basically, it has these talking points that he rehearses, that he practices, but you have to ask the question, like, okay, who's he being funded by? And is he looking at, like, the big picture? Is he trying to find, like, one specific city or one specific item to disprove the idea? I'll show you my notes, actually, on dark money. So, I hammer out notes sometimes in just, like, the books that I'm reading so I can go back and reference them. And this is where it talks about Mark Morano. He would go after scientists basically trying to end their careers, and just like, there's this one guy that he claimed was a charlatan. You know what a charlatan is? It's basically like a big fraud. He was claiming the scientist was like a fraud. And like he was interviewed about it, and he's like, yeah, we had a lot of fun with it. Just like laughed about trying to like ruin this scientist's life. And it highlights, okay, like again, George Mason University, political science degree, and someone asked him, like, are you a scientist? And he joked, like, I'm not a scientist, but I play one on TV. And so just understanding that there are people like him that basically funded by oil companies, by people like the Koch brothers, that are out there trying to convince as many people as they can that climate change isn't a problem. So the idea, a lot of scientists and political analysts would bring up, people believe in climate change. They're going to be pushing for solar. They're going to be pushing for more renewable energies. And just the same way of like the lemonade stand, like people will stop using oil and the oil companies are going to end up losing money long term. All right, believe that we're about the halfway point. Go ahead and take a quick break. Get off the text to someone if you want. That's good, thanks.